Mark Woker here, Principal Advisor for Global Religious Freedom here at the State Department. It's an honor to have our special guest today with us here at the State Department, Rabbi David Hofstadter. Welcome, Rabbi. We're glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to see you. And on a personal note, it's always great. It's always great. You bring a commitment to your role, but also life and enthusiasm, and the sun is shining in Washington more than one place.
Well, thank you. We've been on the Hill already today, headed back there a little bit, meeting with some of the members and just hearing some of the concerns there. Obviously, you bring some concerns to Washington, D.C. as well. Some of the growing anti-Semitic behavior we've seen throughout Europe and other places. Do you want to care to address some of that as far
Absolutely.
as why that's important to you?
Actually, we prepared a document for you, quite comprehensive, about some of the events that have been occurring around the globe, around the world, and tragically more recently the uptick recently than the occurrence of anti-Semitism. And so I think it's an important document. But I wanted to ask you, how do we address this? It seems to be an epidemic. It seems to be a plague. It seems to be increasing. And I want to ask you a couple of questions on that. How do we address it? Do you feel that the American leadership, the American public, that they really comprehend the gravity of the situation?
Yeah, two things come to mind, or two answers come to mind. The first answer to how to address that is boldly. The root of this is very spiritual in its foundation, and I think you cannot deal with timidity when you're dealing with this kind of cancer. So it very much has to be able to be pushed back in a very bold, loud manner. Any kind of anti-Semitic behavior that must take place, and it needs to happen by our leadership. And we have some great leaders, Secretary Rubio and others, who have taken strong positions on this. Our ambassador from America to Israel, my good friend Ambassador Mike Huckabee, he is not bashful at being bold and calling this out for what it is. The second thing I would say, beyond just being bold, is we have to work together collectively. Silo voices are important, but when we're united as far as pushing back on this, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in our country, I think it can have a much greater effect.
I'm glad you mentioned Ambassador Huckabee, and I'm glad you mentioned the spiritual nature of it. I've had some extensive talks with him on this, and his view is that it's a war against God.
Yes.
And therefore it's a war against his people, against the chosen people. Yes. And actually, it is, we find it in the Bible, that it's the war with Amalek, and it's a war for eternity until the Messiah comes, because it's a war against the throne of the Almighty.
Yeah.
But I would add something to that discussion, and I think this is something that we're seeing now, in addition to that, is that there's the group that is spiritual in nature, but then there's the thugs, and then there's the gangsters, and there's the people who will use it to an advantage and try to take advantage, to try to get profit from it and gain from it. And if the door to anti-Semitism is open, they'll come charging through and try to manipulate it for whatever personal gain they might have, whether it's financial or their own ego or their own sickness.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what we're seeing now as well, because the door has been opened somewhat.
Yes, and we saw this. We had a great American get assassinated by the name of Charlie Kirk this past year. Somebody who was incredible at the conservative cause, somebody who could speak incredibly with young people, resonate. After he passed, there have been some influencers, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others, who have tragically used some of that horrific situation to try to promote or say that Charlie had moved in a different way than what many of the people who knew him said he was. We know him to be a strong conservative, somebody that supported Israel. It's well documented. So we are seeing this, having served in Congress, I was the ranking member of Intelligence and Counterterrorism for our Homeland Security Subcommittee. And we did see an upward spike even 10, 11 years ago in the anti-Semitic behavior, some even in our own country. But most of that was coming from, and still is the bulk of it, coming from more of a radical leftist you see on the college campuses in some places. But we have to make sure wherever it's coming from people who have an R by their name or a D by their name, whatever it is, we must be bold and we must be collective in our voices as far as rooting it out.
So what are some of the things that can be done? Because it seems to be that it's only getting worse, it's only escalating, and more people are joining on the bandwagon, more people are using politics as an excuse, and the influence of the people who are enemies of the Jewish people and enemies of America as well are manipulating the situation, and we don't seem to be able to respond to this in a way that is convincing to the public.
Well, I would say that the people that I adhere to as far as working with, whether it's Secretary Rubio or others, I am seeing a boldness. Now, I think one of the things, not giving anyone a pass, but I think one of the things is that many people were caught off guard to just how deep-rooted, because it had been masked for so long, that once the radical serpent head came off, it was like, oh my goodness, this is not just in a silo here or there, as I mentioned. This is something that we have seen where people have become much more bold in the language they would use, the anti-Semitic behavior. So I think we're catching up to speed with it a little bit. We'd always addressed it or condemned it, but I don't think many of us realized just how deep-rooted it was throughout Europe and even some pockets here in the U.S.
Absolutely. You know, what you're saying reminds me very much of what we just heard from the chairman and the congressmen on their discussion about the war.
Yes.
And that they somewhat caught off guard about how much they have to ramp up the war effort and the armament effort, because there are so many smaller countries that have now the capabilities and technology to launch war, to attack U.S., and now they really have to pick up their game. Well, sure. I think on this area as well, I mean, we weren't aware of how deep-rooted and how widespread it is.
No, we weren't aware of it, but we, grateful that President Trump has not been bashful about calling some of this out for what it is, hasn't been bashful as far as going after Iran, and I think one of the things, not to try to put too much of a silver lining on this, but I think the rest of the world has really seen how Israel and the U.S. really are when it comes down, push comes to shove, when those bombs start going off, just how much and how well our two countries have aligned when it comes together of attacking this Islamist radical behavior.
If I can propose
please, yes.
Some suggestions, first of all, on legislation, because there's so much hate that's flying around in social media and print media, and to legislate against it, have watchdog committees that are vigilant and calling it out and fighting against it, to have people active in the legislature enforcing the laws against it, enacting laws and enforcing them to combat this, but also, to your point, to galvanize influencers, political leaders, that when these things come up, to speak forcefully against it and call it out for what it is.
Today we're at the State Department, and we came from the legislative side. Our job is to enforce the law. America has always been a big believer in the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. And I think part of the thing that we need to do is, for those who do not aspire to such hatred, we need to be bold, as I talked about in our speech, not to be intimidated by some of the tactics there, but we are a place that believes in speech. We just want to put the spotlight on those that are the most radical, that are doing damage to our country.
Well, there is a line between free speech and inciting violence.
Yes, if you're, that's one of the reasons of the old adage, you can't yell fire in a movie theater, right? Mm-hmm. There is a problem if you're inciting violence. And so, and I believe anytime it reaches that place where we've seen even on some of the students on college campuses being targeted, that does cross a line and it breaks the law, and those people should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
So are there watchdog agencies that are looking at this and surveilling it, and then really looking into to see that if that is the case,
Oh, absolutely, there are. There are many different. Some in the nonprofit world, some on the government side, that is monitoring that kind of behavior. And I think one of the great people that we have in the DOJ specifically is somebody named Harmeet Dillon, who is making sure that she is walking back and forth, making sure that any of such behavior is called out immediately. The DOJ is not what it was now under the Trump administration, what it was under the Biden administration. They take religious liberty very important in this administration. One of the reasons that we, even though mine is more international, but we have that in our country. President Trump even created a religious commission. Some of those examples led by the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick from Texas, who is the chairman, also the co-chairman, my good friend Dr. Ben Carson. They are specifically citing some of the issues and the examples that you're wanting to talk about and naming here in our country. That is their job, to be able to put a spotlight, to be that watchdog, as you talked about, to make sure that the president understands it, but the American people will also pay attention just the level of these atrocities.
Do you feel that the American people appreciate and understand that this is a threat not only against the Jewish people, but threatens America, it threatens democracy and threatens America, and it threatens the free world?
The majority of Americans, yes, I believe that. But there's always been, and now sometimes larger than others, a thread in this country through sometimes our education system that has taught a generation that America is inherently evil, it's inherently racist. This is the same group that many times is going after our friends in the Jewish community. And that's where you have to be able to say, well, what's their ultimate agenda? What's the ultimate motive? And that is to tear down, not to build up. And as you talked about, that's what we've got to be ever diligent at, making sure that we call such behavior out in a very bold manner.
In certain jurisdictions, they have instituted mandatory education, Holocaust education, that in grade school and middle school, that is part of the curriculum. And it's mandatory that they're taught the history of the Holocaust. Yes. What do you feel about that in America?
Well, I think, first of all, in America, we want to make sure that President Trump is that we have strong American principles, that our students know the Constitution, they know what the Bill of Rights, they know the history of our country. But anytime there's an example where there's been such a travesty as the Holocaust, I do believe it's part of our history and it should be taught in all of our schools.
But there's no way of enforcing something like that.
No, the reason it's difficult, it's because it's teacher by teacher sometimes. And I'm a small, limited government guy, and I want to make sure that when we put out mandates out there, that we want to make sure that we are not setting up a precedent for other administrations to come by and create mandates of what they want taught as well. Mm-hmm. It's a slippery slope sometimes, yes.
Is there a form of education to educate the American public through social media, through television, through the media?
As far as just the overall, as far as the dangers of anti-Semitic behavior?
Yeah, and specifically, generally, whatever the message may be, but specifically for our discussion.
Yeah, there are. There's. I don't know how many is from a government standpoint that they're funded to be able to specifically target those areas. But I do believe there are commissions and things that President Trump has created, like the aforementioned Religious Liberty Commission, that are addressing some of these issues, whether they're in education. In fact, I attended one recently. They did talk about some of the education examples where discrimination was put on for religious liberty or violation against religious liberty. So yes, it's a work in progress as we've seen some of this grow over the last decade, and our job is to address it, not just in the legal sense, but as everyday Americans as well.
Is it a possibility to propose that there should be funded commissions to educate the American public?
Could be. That's not my area of government there, but any time that you can have something that pushes back on some of the evil that we've seen be adapted over the years, I would be certainly supportive.
And who would this fall under? Which area?
This would fall under the legislative branch, whether it's state level or whether that's federal level. The State Department, it falls under the executive branch to enforce the laws that Congress is passing or has passed.
Right. So this is taking it to Congress?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, taking it Congress. having Americans go to D.C., meeting with their congressmen, advocating for things that are important to them, is it individually, and sometimes some of the best ideas when I served on the Hill came from members of the community that I represented in North Carolina. And be a strong voice. Call your congressman, call your senator on these issues.
So you would recommend that Jewish people around the country, around the world, but specifically in America, call their congressman, write, call.
I would say it's absolutely critical. Not only call, but come visit your member of Congress. Call and get an appointment. Come and say, look them in the eye and say, this is why it's important, or this is what's happening in our community. Emails and phone calls are very good, but I know it sometimes it costs resources, but the fact that you're taking the time to come to Washington, D.C., to visit your member of Congress or a member on his team, to be able to relay these issues has an impact unlike any other aspect of communication.
So you would strongly recommend that they come down, they meet, they
come to D.C. and meet. It's the people's house for a reason. There, show up and talk to the team of the member of the Congress. If you get a hold of the member of Congress, if not, somebody on his legislative team to be able to share what's important to you as an American voter.
And you think that this is a valid and important proposal?
It's the American way. It's the way we raise our voices. It's why freedom of speech, as we talked about, is so important to us. Americans need to raise their voices, and part of the problem, Rabbi, is that Americans have become complacent. They have sat on their hands because it didn't come down their street. It wasn't on their door. Well, now it is. So now we collectively and boldly have to be able to be willing to engage in a way that maybe we didn't have to or didn't see our parents have to. It's here upon us, and we've got to push back if we're going to salvage the history that we've been able to for our children and our grandchildren.
And do you believe that this is a valid proposal and something that's very, very worthwhile to try to push for funding, for education, to combat racism?
Yes, anything that can push back on the hate and this growing spike. It's literally like a geyser coming out of the ground, as we've seen over the last few years. It's empowered the haters to be even more bold, because now they don't have to worry about having a cover because their favorite influencer is talking the same way. But unless you push back, unless you advocate for education, unless you are willing to engage in a way that maybe you have in the past, I don't know that we can overcome it like we need to.
You know, it's when I was growing up as a kid, I was very fortunate. Now, I had a grandfather. My wife has no grandparents. My mother lost both parents. My father lost his mother in the Holocaust, almost. But I had a grandfather.
Yes.
And many a time, and this was on the Sabbath, you know, we used to visit and talk, and he used to open up his heart and say, and with great pain and bitterness, he said he could not understand what was the world doing when 6 million were perishing. What were the Jews in America doing when 6 million people of their brethren were being killed? What were they doing? Were they going to the ball game?
Yeah.
What were they doing?
Well, many of our soldiers, young men, answered the call during that time.
Absolutely.
Yes, collectively, yes. I think the world was in shock just that a country would have a leader that would be so bold and do that. I believe we committed about 400,000 lives along with our allies. And so I think at the end of the day, whether it was 80 years ago, World War II, or recently with Iran, I believe it's more evidence that Americans want to stand against such behavior. And obviously, you know, Iran, their motto for the last few years has been death to Israel, death to America. And so we pay attention to those things. And so yeah, we want to partner and continue to partner as we move forward.
So the message should be to the Jewish people that don't ever be in a position where you're going to have to explain to your grandchildren or great-grandchildren that you didn't do anything.
You can pay a small price now or a greater price later to engage, and I think that's why it's important. It's the message that we're constantly trying to preach.
Yes. Well, I thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and keep up your great work, your God's work.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's an honor to know you. Thank you so much.